gospel reading this morning comes from the book of Matthew, and it is Matthew's account of the story of the Transfiguration. As you listen to this passage, listen for, if you'll pardon the pun, reflections of the story that you just heard from Exodus. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Then Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my son, my beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Please pray with me. Might words spoken and words heard and the spaces in between inspire us to reflect on your glory. Amen. The red carpet, the waiting reporters, the fancy dresses, the fabulous jewelry, the special seats, the bags of swag, the glitz, the glamour. It's Hollywood. It's the Oscars. Tonight, literally millions and millions of people around the globe will be glued to their televisions or tablets or mobile devices, watching with bated breath to see who takes home the golden statuettes. Will it be Denzel Washington or Viola Davis for their powerful performances in Fences? Will Meryl Streep win yet again, now with her quirky portrayal of Florence Foster Jenkins? Or will some lesser-known performers have their moment in the spotlight? Well-known or not, they will all be holding their breath while the names of the nominees in their category are read. And then they will wait as a gilded envelope is torn open by a presenter with the magic words, "And the winner is..." There will be shock or tears or uncontrolled laughter, rushing to the stage, reading prepared remarks or mumbling through an impromptu speech, thanking absolutely everybody in the world, even God. Oh, wait a minute, that's the Grammys. Then they will be ushered off to meet photographers and reporters. They will make rounds of the Oscar parties, being hugged and kissed and congratulated. For those who win, it is most clearly a mountaintop experience, a moment of glory. But then it's over. And the next day, or maybe the next week, the Oscar goes on a shelf, the glory begins to fade, and one must come down the mountain and go back to work, for you're only as good as your current film. Peter, James, and John discover that as well. Like Oscar winners, they have an incredible experience. Jesus nominates them to go up the mountain with him to pray, and they do. But once they get there, they realize this isn't going to be your usual Wednesday night prayer meeting. For suddenly, their host is bathed in light. His face and his robe shine like the sun. And as if that wasn't enough, out of nowhere, he's joined by that great representative of the law, Moses, and that great representative of the prophets, Elijah. It is an amazing, dazzling sight. Well, they haven't prepared any remarks, but Peter, ever the brave one, speaks up. How about we build you three a shelter or two? But before he can finish his sentence, a voice as of from heaven breaks in with an academy-worthy announcement. This is my son, my beloved. Listen to him. And it's more than the three can handle. They fall to the ground. They quake in fear. But then, as quickly as it all had happened, it comes to an end. Jesus touches them gently, helps them to their feet, and tells them to fear not. And when they look up, the other two are gone, and the spotlight has been turned off. No swag bags, no statuettes. They don't even get the satisfaction of talking about their experience at some post-transfiguration party hosted by Oscar de la Renta. In fact, Jesus tells them to keep mum about the whole affair until after his death. He offers up a word or two about the meaning of their vision, and then, if you read the following verses, you'll discover they go right back to work, healing the sick, casting out demons, preaching and teaching, and sharing the good news. And apparently they keep their word. They never mention the whole thing to anyone else while Jesus is still alive. But that doesn't mean they don't think about it. That doesn't mean they don't talk about it amongst themselves. Maybe they even compared notes. What do you think? Was that really Elijah? And what about that voice? Do you think it was God? I like to think that whatever they may have thought, the memory of that mountaintop experience, the memory of that moment of glory, was what helped them make it through all the confusion and torment that lay ahead. When the Pharisees challenged Jesus and his authority, they must have remembered that Jesus had stood with those ultimate representatives of authority, Moses and Elijah. When the darkness of despair fell upon them after his arrest, they must have remembered that as they stood on that mountaintop, he had been bathed in bright light. When Jesus was arrested, when he was tortured, when he was crucified, they must have wondered and thought to themselves and remembered those words, "This is my Son, my beloved." The mountaintop moment of glory was over. As soon as they came down, it was done. But the hope it represented and the memory of that moment lingered on and carried them through. Viktor Frankl was born in 1905 in Vienna. He was a bright young man who developed an early interest in psychology. He attended the University of Vienna, and he knew Sigmund Freud. He knew Adler. While he was in school, he worked with high school students in mental distress, and he specialized in suicide prevention, a theme that ran through his entire life's work. In 1938, the Nazis took over Austria, and Frankl, being a Jew, was prohibited from treating those the Nazis called Aryans, fair-skinned, blue-eyed blondes, and others like them. In December of 1941, Frankl married his life's love, Tilly. Though his practice was limited, he used his psychiatric skills to save several Jews from being euthanized. But in time, it all caught up with him, and he and Tilly and his parents were deported to Theresienstadt, a Nazi concentration camp. There, he was allowed to work as a physician for the prisoners, but with very limited supplies. But then things changed for the worse. And in 1944, he and Tilly were first moved to Auschwitz and then separated. Frankl was sent to a labor camp near Dachau, and he was forced into hard labor. He and his fellow prisoners were awoken far before dawn and driven to march in the dark for miles to their workplace. And then, at the end of a very long workday, they were forced to march back after sunset. We stumbled over large stones and through large puddles. The accompanying guards, he wrote, kept shouting at us and driving us with the butts of their rifles. A chance remark one day on their march by a fellow prisoner brought to Frankl's mind his wife Tilly. And as we stumbled along for miles, slipping on icy spots, he writes, my mind clung to my wife's image. I heard her answering me, saw her smile, her frank and encouraging look. Real or not, it was more luminous than the sun that was beginning to rise. And it was then that Frankl realized a truth that would transform his life and that of many others. I understood that a man can, through loving contemplation of the image he carries of his beloved, achieve fulfillment. And for the first time in his life, he writes, he understood the meaning of the words, the angels are lost in perpetual contemplation, of the infinite glory. It was that memory, that image of Tilly, that allowed him to put one tired foot ahead of the other and to make it through each of his long, long days. Frankl lived to write about his experiences after the war, and his hope-based psychology made a major contribution to psychiatry. More than likely, you read one of his books when you were in college. It's a thin little volume called Man's Search for Meaning. You and I will probably never capture an Oscar, much less experience a vision quite as dazzling as the Transfiguration, or one as life-saving as the one experienced by Viktor Frankl. But we understand, don't we? For while we usually live in the valleys of our lives are also marked by mountaintop memories. Mountaintop memories of those times when God's love came shining through the happenings of the day. That high school graduation ceremony where your relieved parents beamed, smiling from ear to ear, and all that parental love, God's love, came shining through. The day you had your first successful interview and landed a job in your chosen field, and you walked along 10 feet above the ground, and God's love came shining through. The night you got married, and as you held your beloved, you could have danced till dawn because you knew that love, God's love, made known through this person, was real. The birth of your firstborn child, when you first held him or her, and you can still remember that moment even though that child is now retired. Because it was a moment when God's love just was there, and you can't explain it, but you knew it. Your retirement party, when your co-workers went on and on about how much they would miss you, and somehow you knew that for once it was all genuine. That even in the workplace, God's love can be made known. Such experiences are grand and glorious. They are blessings in our lives. But even though they are fleeting and one needs to climb down the mountain and face the facts that student loans need to be paid off and a job can be a real chore and making a marriage last takes real effort, and every child comes with bills and dirty diapers. Despite all that, it is the memories of those moments of glory that give us the hope and courage to live in the valley. Indeed, those moments of glory, those days of celebration, can carry us through the time that follows. Why else do we keep our old yearbooks and first paycheck stubs and bronzed booties? Why else do we wear wedding rings and inscribed watches from former employers? They may not be golden statuettes for the mantle, but they are tangible reminders of hope and love and glory and all that propels us forward. I am convinced, sisters and brother, that those moments of glory, those times when God's love breaks through and shines most brightly, I am convinced that it is the memory of those times that sees us through. Shortly after the end of World War II, a poem written by a Holocaust victim was discovered scratched on a basement wall where that person had been held in what had been occupied territory. It was and is a simple reminder that hope can come from moments of glory remembered. I believe, began the anonymous poet, I believe in the sun even when it is not shining. I believe in love even when I cannot feel it. I believe in God even when God is silent. Peter, James, and John had to come down from the mountain and in time had to face the crucifixion. Viktor Frankl still had to slog through the darkness and after the war had to discover what had happened to his loved ones at Auschwitz. The anonymous poet was still in the cellar, and you and I face the challenges of living every day, the difficulties and hardships of life. But we have a choice. We can give in to despair, or we can remember those precious moments of glory when we have been shown God's love in bright and luminous ways. Those times when that love has shone so brightly in our lives, it's unmistakable. We can choose to give in. We can choose to give up. Or we can remember that God's love can and does break through even the darkest of nights.